Our story follows a kid named Oswald. 2 years ago, the mill in his town closed, leaving his dad out of a job. They were making it by thanks to his mom having a stable job at the hospital. They could afford to move to another town, but they refused to stay to take care of their sick grandmother. Both parents were busy during the day, so his dad chose to live in at an old pizzeria bought by a name called Jeff. This happened through all summer, and quickly, the boy began to get tired of pizza and seeing the same old run-down place. And the fact that his dad was usually late to pick him up didn't help. One of those days, Oswald hears from a family that in this old and decaying place, there used to be a ball pit, and without much else to do, he decides to go look for it, thanks to the lack of security at the site, and with the intention of playing a prank on his dad for leaving him here for so long, he decides to hide in the pit. What happens next is extremely weird. Oswald hears noises and laughs. When he comes out of the pit, the place is full of life and working. There were a lot of kids his age playing. The strangest thing is that the animatronics mascots were very similar to the ones he used to draw, unconsciously. He overheard some kids talking about Ghostbusters, implying that, somehow, it was sent back to the summer of 1984. Here he meets 2 kids, named Mike and Chip, who confirms his suspicions that he was indeed in the past. They invite him to play along with them. Finally, Oswald made friends, even though they were from a totally different time. Playing hide and seek, Oz ends up in a service area, next to one of the suits used by the employees. The other kid didn't find him. He was about to leave when the lights of the restaurant suddenly went out, and from the other door of the room, a monstrous animatronic in a golden rabbit suit comes out stumbling, and almost notices him. After recomposing himself, he hears cries from the outside. Children running around and parents trying to get them to safety. Either out of courage or morbid curiosity, he heads to the source of the screaming. There, he sees the monstrous animatronic, reaching out to him, inviting him to get in the room. Maybe Mike and Chip were there and, to his horror, at the bottom of the dim-lit room, he sees the lifeless bodies of 6 children. The monster tries to grab him, but Oswald manages to escape, heading to the ball pit with the creature right behind him. Somehow, that got him back to this time. His father was here to pick him up and scolds the kid for getting into such a dangerous and disgusting place, but he wasn't expecting what happened next. The monster followed him to this time, taking his father to the ball pit. Oswald struggles to get him out of there. He succeeds, but something was very wrong. It was as if the spirit of that thing was possessing his old man, and only he was able to see it, for Jeff was completely oblivious to it, although it's not like Jeff seems to care much about anything around him, to be honest. The thing pretending to be his father drives to their home. Keep in mind that who he believed was his father, Oswald, at all times saw him as the Spring Bunny suit doing the actions that his dad would normally do, even though nobody else could see it. The family cat, who was usually very friendly, was terrified. The boy immediately heads to his room. There he considers his options. There was a monstrous animatronic from the past pretending to be his dad, so he waits for the imposter to go to sleep, takes his father's phone and calls his mother. She was working at the hospital. Very worried, he tells her it's an emergency. She came as soon as possible and tries to tell him that something was very wrong with his dad, but to his surprise and horror, she saw nothing wrong with the man. Whatever was going on, he was alone in this matter. Worried and without options, Oswald decides to return that same night to the ball pit. He was sure that his father was trapped in there somehow. He manages to get away from the Spring Bunny suit and heads to Jeff's pizzeria, with the excuse that his father ruined dinner. Oswald goes back into the pit. Surprisingly, it worked and sets out to look for some clues. The place seemed very empty. In the service area, next to some spare parts, he finds his dad's wallet. In the corridor, there was a trapped kid inside an endoskeleton. He manages to free him, not before being chased by Spring Bunny, forcing him to return to the ball pit. Unfortunately, that was all the time he had. He needed to go back home and think of a better plan for tomorrow. Oswald really hoped that all of this was just a bad dream, but when he woke up and went to get his breakfast, the monster was still there, watching from across the dinner table, and his mother was completely unaware of this curse. The kid says that this time he would take the school bus and grabs his breakfast. Once there, it was clear that he wouldn't concentrate. The only thing he could think of was the monster supplanting his dad. He couldn't talk to anyone about this either, since he was the only one that could see the creature. On his way out, he sees a girl being picked on by some bullies and tries to cheer her up. It turns out she also liked books and was a fan of mythology. She also mentions that while helping her grandpa cleaning up some stuff, she found an old sketchbook with some drawings that he might like. After all, he was a fan of science fiction. Oz is very surprised to see that it had diagrams of the animatronics hunting him in the pit, leaving him with more questions than answers, but if her grandpa used to work at the pizzeria, this might be useful to fend off the creatures. He thanks the girl, whose name is Gabrielle, and goes home. That night, he comes back to the place. Now he had a plan. The place felt more quiet than usual. In the kitchen, he hears a kid crying, but one of the animatronics, Chica, is blocking the entrance. Following the instructions in the sketchbook, he uses a slice of pizza to distract the robot. The kid trapped turns out to be Mike, but there were still no traces of his dad. After taking his friend to the exit, the spring bunny attacks again, and Oz makes his way out to the ball pit. The following night, Oz returns again to the pizzeria. The reason behind why Jeff is still not being investigated for negligence remains a mystery. He remembers that the arcade was closed. Maybe Chip or his father were there, but the place was being guarded by another animatronic, Bonnie. Oz goes back to the stage and plays the guitar, making a distraction. Fortunately, Chip was there and assures him that Mike was safe. But the kids had no time to talk. The monster and Freddy were behind them, and our protagonist goes back again through the pit. The next morning, his mental state gets even worse. At least, he didn't have to escape from his dad this time. But he couldn't go back to school without having hallucinations with the animatronics anymore. That night, he returns with a firecracker to the ball pit. Following the instructions of the sketchbook, he uses the bank of the explosive to get Freddy out, resetting his sensors for a moment. He gets into the camera room. Here was another terrified girl. Oswald frees her and is again chased by the spring bunny. Regardless, this was it. He would finish this tomorrow. That night, he jumped into the pit again, and the monster was already on his heels. Oz frees one last girl and finally finds his dad, who was being attacked by the spring bunny. He struggles with the animatronic and jumps into the pit with the man. The monster goes after them, but is distracted by an old photo of two men in front of an office. Oswald found that photo on his trips in the pizzeria. At last, both returned to the present, but the spring bunny followed him from the pit. With a second row of sharp teeth, he bites into the kid's arm, but the boy manages to get out. The animatronic continues the struggle but gets tangled in the ropes above the ball pit. And just like that, he stops moving completely. At last, Oswald wakes up his father and they both reconcile. The boy tries to explain all that happened as he just playing a prank on him. And the man promises they will move to a better town and will find a way to take their grandma with them. Alright, in essence that's all there is in the game, a retold of the events seen on the book of Into the Pit, but without going much into detail of what's going on exactly here. In the Fnaf universe there are three types of possession, so to speak. Someone may die and might just possess a body. Those are the souls of the children that most of us are familiar with, like the puppet for example. Then there's something called the remnant. This is like a metal-like substance of liquid consistency. It acts as a glue that keeps a soul bound to a body. This is mostly explained on Sister Location, since almost all of the animatronics in that game are haunted by Remnant. Particularly Ennard, since he's made of multiple remnant, but I will not get into detail of how Ennard works, okay? Then there is the most powerful and supernatural of all, the Agony, also known as Dark Remnant. It's something very painful or traumatic were to happen, like just let's say the assassination of 6 children. All the pain and suffering of those actions tend to stick to a place, or to something. Along the game, we'll find some arcade minigames in the style of the first Fnafs. These are necessary to get the good ending. This describes the events seen on some of the books. All the suffering, including Afton death, it all ended up somewhere in the pizzeria, which is implied is the same restaurant where the first murders occurred. All this suffering ended up in the ball pit. and more specifically, in a spring bunny suit that lay at the bottom of the pit. The agony that possesses that suit, I understand, is from Afton's death. That's why that animatronic, which is named by some as Pit Trap, behaves like Afton in many of the things it does. And I know I've said several times that Oswald's father was the one who was possessed, but in reality, it was the animatronic all the time. All the things we saw related to the pit, traveling to the past, rescuing the children, it was all an illusion, part of the supernatural powers of the agony that haunted the pit. And of course, there's Pit Trap, who had the agony of Afton. Oswald's father lay at the bottom of the ball pit for 5 days. The first time we saw Pit Trap with Oswald, from that moment on, the monster supplanted his dad. And as we saw, its powers extend to a lot of people. Then again, the pain possessing Pit Trap belongs to Afton. That's why when seeing the photo of the two men in front of the office, he glitches for a moment, since it still retains some of the memories of William. And that picture seemed very familiar to him. Anyways, the creature ends up choking on some ropes above the ball pit. So there's no need to worry about it, I think. I understand that they released the game for the 10th anniversary of the Fnaf franchise, and to me it's a little strange that of all the things they could have chosen, they choose this book. I don't know, maybe it means something else from the franchise. Anyways, that might be it for today. I hope you liked the video, and if that's the case, remember to leave a like and subscribe. That really helps me and the channel. And leave me a comment down below of what do you think about the game, or if there's something important that I'm missing. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.